So like Ed said, I'm looking to, in 30 minutes, make you reverse engineering experts. No, but seriously, I want to try and demonstrate some of the benefits of why you should, if you don't already have the skills in reversing and even in exploit development, why you should head there. And I'm happy to hopefully answer some questions at the end. I will try to be as quick as possible. I am one of those individuals, as you can see, I brought my own laptop because I'm hoping we're far enough down in the basement the demo gods can't reach. Like my cell phone can't be reached down here, because I'm one of those people that has to always show demos or it drives me crazy, but we're looking for a smooth, no problems demo session today, so we'll see how that goes. Now let me say a couple things here to kind of explain what I'm going to be talking about and why. Here it says, but I'm a pen tester. Why should I care about coding, reversing, and exploit dev? And having taught for over 10 years with SANS, especially in penetration testing type courses, that's a common attitude. I have a lot of people who say, exploit dev is not pen testing, reversing is not pen testing. And that's why I put there on the bottom. Exploit dev is in the GXPN, which is in the 660 course, and the OSCP from Offensive Security, which is another very popular certification. So if it's in those courses, and if things are just getting harder and harder as we go forward, I'll show you some examples, you absolutely should be at least scripting, at least understand how to do basic reversing, how to look at something like a Metasploit script and understand what's going on. So if you have to change something, I've seen it many times where if someone would have simply changed one little byte or one little offset in that script, they could have gotten the exploit to work and they would have won the pen test or the capture the flag, but they didn't know how to do it. So just a quick rant about the past and present. I sound like, an old person here saying, back when I was a kid, I walked in the snow for 20 miles to get to school. Back when I started, there were not many jobs in the field of exploit dev and reversing malware, and that's early 2000s. And nowadays, there's a ton. I live in Berkeley, California, and around the Bay Area, there are a ton of jobs. Recruiters can still not find enough people with the skills in C, C++, Objective-C, assembler, to be able to fill the positions that they need. C and C++ will never go away. Some people are like waiting, like it's going to go. No, it's not going to go away because it's a low-level language. It's extremely powerful. You've got direct control over registers and memory and hardware, and it's extremely fast. Just a simple example. There's a tool I use a lot called bindiff, which is binary diff. And it allows you to take two versions of a file, like an unpatched application and a patched application, to identify the code changes inside. When I use bindiff, which was acquired by Google, used to be Zynomics, it's very, very fast. When I use another fantastic tool, but it was written in Python, called Diaphora by Joxine Corrette, brilliant tool. He's absolutely brilliant guy. He's donated and given so many things to the security community. But my point is, it's 10 times slower sometimes. It's a high-level language. It's just a lot slower as it goes through and tries to do these low-level operations. It's just an example there. But the number of people who knew how to write exploits was very, very low. I think I just saw on Twitter a couple days ago was the, 50th anniversary of a left one smashing the stack for fun and profit. That was back in the mid-90s, and I remember people saying, memory corruption bugs are dead, they're going away. Write what, where attacks are going away, they're going to be gone. And here we are in 2017. They're still there. It's the exploit mitigations that are blocking the ability to successfully exploit them a lot. They're trying to mitigate bug classes by preventing you from attacking them. And compared to today, I'll just say exploit writing back then was easy. If anyone misses that world, like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Nirvana, the IoT world is there for you. And it is like getting the 90s back, which is fantastic. But Windows 10, with the latest fall creators update, man, it's hard. They've now put Emmet into the Windows Defender, and it's absolutely powerful in terms of stopping attackers from being able to exploit a system. It's not stopping everything, of course, or I wouldn't be doing it, but it's a lot more challenging. And at the end of the day, I know that's a very overused meme, but you don't want to be that person, right? I feel like that every day still, no matter how far I think I get in my career. But you want to be, and that's why I love telling people in the courses I teach, you want to be that person who solves problems where other people are failing. You're that just clever person who comes up with these brilliant and creative solutions to solve hard problems. If you go and interview down at places like Google and VMware and Facebook and all these other companies out by where I live, you go into that interview room, there's going to be a bunch of whiteboards around the room. And when you see that going into an interview, be afraid, because that means you're going to be composing code on the walls. And they expect you, they'll even tell you, I'm making this up, because Google can listen to all things, and they'll know if you gave away an interview question. But they'll say something like, we want you to solve the binary hash table collision problem using this pseudo language with the following constraints. Compose it on the whiteboard for us. And it's like, and a lot of times the problem's not even solvable. They just want to see how you approach it, and if you at least try, and where your brain goes. And that really helps them determine whether or not you're a good fit for the organization. So this, I'll just put it up there. I don't know, I love that photo. I don't know why. It makes no sense if you first look at it. So look at my entire dog. But to me, that's the attack surface of Windows XP. Like, it's all reachable. There's no protection on that dog. And Windows XP is still out there, sadly, in some places. I have a friend who works at Riot Games, and he said that XP is still common in China with video game users because they don't want to get away from XP because they can do cheats on these games. And if they move off XP, they can't. Then that way the company could upgrade. XP also, of course, still in ATM machines out there and other environments. I heard about one big agency in Australia who's not getting off of Windows XP until 2018. So it's still out there, but we shouldn't, it shouldn't be, right? I just make this funny little thing. That's XP on the left compared to Windows 10 on the right. Someone who does exploit dev, it's hard. I will tell you. And a lot of people come to courses and they say, how come we're not starting with Windows 10, 64-bit, with the Fall Creators Update available, and just going at it? And I always say, you can't, if you're going to teach math for the first time, you're not just going to start with calculus, right? You're going to learn the basics and algebra and those types of things and work your way up. You can't jump in and attack that dog. So just a quick note, low-level versus high-level languages. There's no specific formula here, specific classification, but easier languages, higher level like PowerShell and Python and Lua and Perl, and then you work your way down. You get to medium level or languages like C# and Java, then you get up higher into the harder stuff like C and C++. Eventually, you get those binary ninjas who can just pound out opcodes and write a whole program that way. The lower level languages are typically what we refer to as unmanaged code. Unmanaged meaning that you can get yourself into a lot more trouble. You've got a lot more power. You've got the ability to do many, many things that you can't with the higher level languages, but they're dangerous potentially. All of our kernels, our operating system kernels, our big applications like Microsoft Office Suite, Adobe, those are all C, C++ low-level applications. So let's get into reversing a little bit. Disassembly is the practice of, on the left there, we've got the machine code, right? And you can look at it in binary or hexadecimal. But when we think of opcodes, we're looking at hexadecimal opcodes that are specific to an instruction set, tied to an architecture, like MIPS or ARM or PowerPC or x64. So on the left, you can see it says 90, and it's the infamous no-op instruction if you're on x86. So those are the opcodes on the left. And on the right over there, those are the instructions and operands. So 90 maps to NOP, no operation. EB is the opcode for the instruction jump short. And then you can see we're saying jump short 16 bytes. And then 50 is the opcode for the instruction push the accumulator register onto the stack. So I'm just showing you what the process of disassembly is. You're taking machine code and you're disassembling it into its mnemonic instruction that's more human readable. And then we can go further than that, of course, and go all the way up to decompilation and get back to some sort of C, like pseudocode. So two flavors of disassembly syntax, Intel and Intel. As you can see, I crossed out AT&T, but it does exist. For some reason, Intel people think that AT&T people are insane. But really, the big differences are the source and destination are swapped. So I have an example down there on the bottom, and you can see the top one says Intel. 890424, those are the opcodes. And as you can see with Intel or AT&T, they're the same. So this is disassembly syntax. It's the way you would like it shown to you. It's not changing the code at all. It's just how it displays it to you. So in Intel, we would read that top instruction as move into the top of the stack whatever's stored in the accumulator register. So we're saying that the destination is first and the source is second. And then the bottom one in AT&T, we're looking at it where we say move long, which means 32-bit integer, or here, move long. Whatever's stored is an indirect operand. The % sign means indirect. Whatever's inside the accumulator register, into the top of the stack. How do we know top of the stack? Because there's parentheses around it, which indicates it's a pointer. If we didn't have the parentheses or the square brackets above, we'd be saying copy the contents of one register into another register. But here, since we put the little pointer syntax, we're saying move it to that destination. So just one thing to keep in mind is if you can read one, you can read both. If you look at GDB, the GNU debugger, it defaults to AT&T typically, but you can change it. If you look at something like Immunity Debugger or IDA Pro or WinDbg, or is this one Italian student I had a few months ago in EMEA said, WinDbg, which I think is way better. That's going to be an Intel syntax by default. So a quick recommended resource, if you're familiar with Chris Eagle, who's a brilliant reverse engineer expert at the Naval Postgrad School in Monterey, California. His team, School of Root, won a couple years of a row in DEF CON's you get the black badge in the CTF challenge, and then they ran the game for a couple of years. Brilliant reverse engineer. He wrote the IDA Pro unofficial book, and Ilfak, who is the lead architect and owner of Hexrays, who makes IDA, says we're not even going to bother writing a manual because this one's better than we could ever do. So I highly recommend that. There's also resources like the Hexrays forum. You have to have an active license. There's plugins available. There's a plugin contest every year that Hexrays has. IDA 7 finally came out, which is great because it's now a true 64-bit application, but they did redesign the API, so all of your plugins don't work anymore. You have to port them over, which, not too big of a deal, but it's cleaned up. It's much, much nicer. So what is IDA? Real quickly, it's an interactive disassembler is what it stands for. It allows you to do what I showed you a couple slides ago. Take machine code, opcodes, and convert them into their mnemonic instruction. And there's a couple different types of disassemblers. There are recursive descent disassemblers and linear sweep. I'll explain both of those in a moment. It can disassemble many different processor architectures. It supports remote debugging. We'll talk about that for a second. It allows you to view cross-references. It just expedites your ability to reverse engineer exponentially. And like I say at the bottom, a tool that makes you visually and look and feel smarter. Because if you have that up on your screen when somebody walks by, they're like, we're keeping that guy. The first time I pulled up IDA, that's what I saw. It's complicated at first if you don't know where to start, and it's extreme Donkey Kong there. I was bored one day on a conference call, made that. And what you see there, that's a graphical display. It's a graphical disassembly in what's called recursive descent mode, and it makes it much more easy to follow the paths because we can visualize it. So the disassembly types, linear sweep, means start at this entry point and go one instruction at a time, disassembling onward. So it's linear sweep. Start here, just disassemble down. That's what most disassemblers do. IDA is a recursive descent disassembler, which means that you start at one block, and it understands things like conditional branches. It understands things like switches or how data can be commingled in. And what that looks like is here. If this were linear sweep, you would not see what you see on the slide there. You would just see all the disassembly in a row with no separated blocks like that. The advantage here is you can see up in the top, I know it's kind of small on the screen, but it says compare what EAX is pointing to what's stored in ESI, and those are processor registers. So it's basically just a comparison. And if the comparison is a match, so if we're comparing two strings, for example, and the strings are equal, we're going to set something called the 0 flag. And then you can see this conditional jump that says jump if 0, or jump on 0. It's going to check the result of that comparison to see if it was true or not, and it's going to go one direction or the other. So again, it allows you to much more easily visualize what path your code is going to take, or the processor is going to take. Here's our primary dashboard. Let me just jump over to IDA here for a moment. So here's IDA, where we've got, and again, if you never used it before, it's a lot to just digest by looking at it on the screen. The big window in the middle is your disassembly window, and it's in recursive descent mode right now. If you hit the space bar, it switches it over to more of a linear sweep view. It's still recursive descent, because on the left, it actually shows you where things are going. But this is more of a disassembly kind of linear sweep. And there again is your graphical view, your recursive descent. Over on the left, that big window here, is your functions. So that's all the internal functions in the program. You have, of course, a graphical overview. You've got at the bottom there on the left, your log window. And if you've taken a SANS course with me in the not too recent past, you've probably seen me show you this, because this was a big deal to me. How many of you have used IDA before? So quite a few. So I've just done something horrible here. What did I do? I undocked a window in IDA. How dare me? You don't do that. Because what I used to think was, once you did that, you can't redock it, because you grab it and you start going around and it doesn't want to redock anywhere. You can full screen it, but no redocking. And I took Chris Eagle's advanced IDA course at Black Hat many years ago, just to see if I was missing anything from 760 that should be in there. And I was like, raised my hand. I was like, Chris, how do I redock? He's like, I've got this. He's like, see that little gray bar between the top and the main window? Just very gently hover over it and it expands. Then you can pull that down and you can redock it anywhere you want. I was like, yeah, worth the price of the class. So things like this are little things, right? I showed my wife and she's just like, So we've also got a bunch of panes up here, or tabs up here, like we can look at the import address table and the export address table. By the way, how much time do I have left? Someone help me? You got about 22 minutes. Sweet, that's perfect. All right. So we've got all that fun stuff to look at. Now, if we want to zoom in, it's one problem with IDA. It's not really a problem. It's just like use Vi or Vim for the first time, right? No one you get stuck and you feel dumb. You're like, how do I get out of this? What do you mean? You hit escape and then colon and then exclamation point and Q? How did you not know that? And then once you live in Vi and Vim for a while, you're like, wow, this is an amazing tool. It's powerful. I love it. This is similar. It's like 1 and W, zoom in and zoom out. But if you didn't know that, then you wouldn't know to hit those buttons. But there's like a list of shortcuts you can pull up, and you can modify it. And there's lots of templates out there and registry changes you can make to kind of design IDA the way you want. So if we want to zoom in, we can just click on a block here and then hit 1, and we zoom into the disassembly there. Let me jump back out to the slides for a moment. So we looked at that. There's our imports. Imports are important because if you have dynamically linked a program, so you're not statically compiling it where everything you need. I do the silly analogy. Like if I was going to come over to your house and I was going to cook food, and I show up, and I was like, I'm good at cooking Thai food, and I'm going to bring my stuff over to your house and cook it at your house. And I knock on the door and hey, Steve, come on in. And I have a truck outside, and I'm bringing my stove and tables and everything I could possibly need to make this meal. That would be static compilation. I wouldn't do that, right? I would bring over just the ingredients because I assume that you have all the rest of the things that I need, my dependencies. So when I get to your house, then I have to do what's called linking. I say, where is your stove? And you say, it's over there. And now I've linked it. So all of those dependencies are stored in your import address table on Windows, or if you're on Linux, it would be in your procedural linkage table and your global offset table. And again, those are dynamic dependencies that have to be linked at runtime. If we do statically compile things, then I bring things along. But we're really not supposed to do that for various reasons. One, it makes your program unnecessarily large. And it also, if you statically compile a dynamic link library into your program, and then someone discovers a vulnerability in that DLL, and Microsoft patches it, too bad. You've statically compiled the old version in, so the program's going to use the vulnerable version. Another important thing is if you can get them, debugging symbols. These will save you. If you've done malware reverse engineering, then you're not lucky enough to get symbols typically. One time I was at Wells Fargo, I was a security architect for many years, and they asked me to look at some malware, and a symbols came with it, a symbol file came with the malware. And I'm like, this is odd, the developer must have made a mistake. And I open it up and put the symbols in, and it's all profanity was the name. So somebody was trolling. It's like, well played, right? But this over on the left, see how it says sub underscore and then some hexadecimal address? If you don't have the symbols for those functions, that's what they're named. And that doesn't help you very much. Like if I say, I know this laser pointer is not very bright, but if I say, what's that function right there in the middle do? Who knows? But if we look to the right, we can see it says load cursors and icons. So function names or symbols are very, very helpful when reverse engineering. So Microsoft is nice enough to give them to us. I don't think that they want to give them to us, but they have to give them to us because developers need to be able to look at the symbols when they're debugging their applications to run on Windows. They don't give us the symbols for libraries associated with Microsoft Office, for example, because they don't have to. But symbols are immensely useful in speeding up your reversing. Alternatives to IDA, because IDA does cost money. IDA 7 just came out. You know, I can't remember exactly how much, but like $700 for the 32-bit version and double that for the 64-bit version. But you can use Radari 2. It's a open source, free disassembler and does many other things as well. And it's fantastic, lots of community support. And then Hopper is a commercial but much cheaper alternative to IDA as well. But at the end of the day, most people will use IDA at some point if you're working in a big company and you're doing lots of reverse engineering. But these are fantastic tools. Remote debugging is something you want with a disassembler. It's got support for WinDbg. It's got support for remote GDB servers, all kinds of different devices. You can see a list there in the middle. That's just a sample of them. What you're doing here is you're using IDA as your front end. Like one thing we cover in 760 on day one is how to set this up. Because if you're inside GDB on Linux and you're using the command line debugger, it's not very intuitive and you might want something graphical. So you could use DDD or EDB or one of these other versions, or you can use IDA as your front end. So you run a little stub, a little application that runs on Linux and it debugs locally, but it opens up a socket and it waits for IDA to connect. And then you're able to go and do your debugging with IDA as your front end. It makes life a lot more, attractive visually here. IDA SDK and automation, one thing that will greatly help you if you utilize it is scripting, IDA scripting. You can use the native IDC scripting language, but most people use IDA Python, which I'll show you some examples here coming up. You can also write plugins in C++, which are going to be very, very fast, of course. But then you have to compile them, and it's a lot more difficult if you're not a programmer to write a plugin versus getting something working like IDA Python scripting. But if I had to manually do the things that I need to do when I'm reversing and doing exploit dev, I would not be effective. It would just take way, way too long. And a lot of what I do in my home life, in my career, is exploit development. I write exploits. I've sold over probably, I would say, 50 to 60 exploits now. Not too long ago, I sold a Windows 10 kernel exploit, and those can be very lucrative. So anything you can do to cut corners, to automate, bug hunting. The more you learn about bugs, the more you can write scripts to go and find instances of potentially what are potential bugs. So IDA Python, I'll just show you some examples here in a moment, but it replaces the interactive box at the bottom of IDA, and by default on newer versions of IDA, IDA Python will be what's there. You can click on it and change it to IDC if you want. This right here, let me show you a couple, because this is hard to explain. There's something called stack pivoting, and I drew this. I brought my little drawing pad here to see if I can get this working, to show you what this actually does. But so let's say we've got, is this actually working? Yes, it is working. Sweet. All right, let's say we've got the stack over here. And the stack, if you're unfamiliar, is the procedure stack for the process. Every thread gets a stack, and it's used by functions. So if a function gets called, that function gets its own little allocation on the stack called a stack frame. That's all it is. So again, to simplify, when a function gets called, every function gets a little stack frame, which is able to store local variables and things like that, allocate buffer space. They're finite in lifetime, though, because when the function's done, we just terminate, we just tear it down. So there's some powerful registers over here. One's called the stack pointer. I'll put ESP for 32-bit extended stack pointer. And there's three, and I know a lot of you know this answer. What are three instructions that are extremely powerful associated with this pointer? Push, pop, and return. Yep. So push, pop, and ret. Those only take action on this register here, and they're extremely powerful because the push instruction will push whatever you tell it onto the stack where the stack pointer points. The pop instruction will pop off the stack into a designated register, whatever you tell it to pop. And then the return redirects the instruction pointer to that address where it continues execution of code. So if you can get control of the instruction pointer, that's the most powerful register, of course, but the stack pointer is what we rely on heavily for things like return-oriented programming because of those three instructions. So a lot of times what happens is, I'll draw really quickly, you've got like a C++ object out here, and you've got a virtual function table. So I'll put C++ object, And the top of the object, there's something called a virtual pointer, a VPTR. And it points to something called a virtual function table. And inside the virtual function table are a bunch of slots, and these slots have pointers to virtual functions. This is called indirection, and indirection is typically seen as bad, and C++ loves indirection. And my joke, my analogy is, if you call a pizza place and you order a pizza to be delivered to you, you just trust the pizza. What could have happened to that pizza? We don't think about those things. Versus you go to Whole Foods, you want to spend a lot of money, you make your own pizza at home, and you know it's safe because there's no indirection. You bought the ingredients, you cut them up, you cooked it, you ate it. That pizza coming from a delivery place could have gone on some Pulp Fiction style adventure on its way to your house, and you're just trusting it. This is indirection. So we take advantage of this by exploiting this with type confusion bugs and use after free bugs. And the problem here that I'm trying to demonstrate with pivoting is you've got the accumulator register, which points out to the virtual function table right now, and the stack pointer that points to the stack. And what we want to do is pivot. We want to hit this instruction that says exchange EAX with ESP. I know my handwriting's atrocious. But by exchanging these, that means a stack pointer will point out to here after we've done some kind of use after free exploit, and then we can take advantage of those instructions there that we like so much. So this silly drawing here, I found it from years ago. I made it. It's Sam and Frodo from Lord of the Rings. And remember the scene where he's like, I haven't been this far from the Shire, Sam, or something like that. And he's like, it'll be okay. It'll be an adventure. Like that's stack pivoting. Sometimes my analogies are great. Sometimes they're awful, but I'm okay with that. You should have seen the one I did at RSA a couple years ago. I explained use after free by a kid's hamster dying while she was in school, and then the parents going to a pet store and replacing the hamster so she wouldn't know, but it was a malicious hamster. And the audience is just like, whoa. and Ed, I had James Lyon explain that part, because James Lyon has a very attractive British accent, and he can pull that stuff off way better than me. So I'll just run an example script. So if we look at Notepad++ here, there's a few lines of code. And you could do it in fewer lines of code if you wanted to. And all we're doing here is a little bit of Python. But we're interacting with the APIs in IDA. And it's going through looking for C394. 94 is the opcode for a stack pivot, and C3 is a return. And if it finds them in the code, then it will tell us. So here I've got my guys up, so I double click it, and you can see on the log window, it's going through Sophos Antivirus main engine, and it's looking for stack pivot instructions, or at least it's supposed to be. Yeah, there it goes. So you can see it found one, and it's going through and finding a bunch of them now. So by scripting, we can go through an input file, and we can find instances of code sequences we want to use in our exploits. Like if you've ever run a Metasploit script and it does what's called a jump ESP, which is a very common old stack technique, and it's broken. Like I used to do an interview where we did that. 10? Thanks. I used to do an interview where we did that. I'm one of those interviewers. I have you come in and you sit down and I'm like, we can talk all day, but instead we're just going to do stuff. I want to see you in action. So I would intentionally break a script, like a Metasploit script, and I would say, it's broken. So you can have the debugger, you can have whatever you want, fix it. And all I did was change the address that was used to overwrite the return pointer to a bad one. And I was waiting to see if they could go in and find a new jump ESP or whatever, opcode, and plug that address in. All right, so I have a little bit more time. Let me see what I also wanted to cover here. So Flirt and Flare, just to mention this, and I'll do a couple last-minute quick things and then take questions. Flirt and Flare are used primarily by like CTF teams, capture the flag teams, and also like a malware. If you've done a lot of malware research, these can help you. Because when things are statically compiled into the program, wouldn't it be nice to know what is library code and what is not library code? Because we don't want to reverse engineer library code. And if we don't have the symbols, we have no idea that it is library code. So wouldn't it be nice to have a way to go in and identify that so we can remove it? That's what Flirt and Flare are for. Flare is the tool that you can use to write these signatures, like against glibc or whatever. And then Flirt are the signatures that you apply. So quick demo, I'll show you what it looks like. I've got IDA up here. And I'll bring up this Flare example. So it's just disassembling it. It should be pretty quick. Now look up top here, this color coding. It says that all this is regular functions, and it doesn't see any library code. Well, in fact, actually, I statically compiled this, and it's a ton of library code in there. So how do we do it? We would have had to generate a Flirt signature. We can use strings or something to look and see what libraries we use. And then we generate Flirt signatures using Flare, and then we apply the signature and watch what happens. So let's say load file, Flirt signature file. We'll scroll down. And run it, the correct one. Now watch the top. Let me pull this up. Watch what happens. Let me zoom out. No, it did. See, it colored it all over here. It's all like light blue now. I'm not sure why it didn't. There it goes. It's just a weird bug. But see how it's all light blue now? So it's all library code, almost the whole thing. If you zoom way in, up in the top corner, you can see there's a little bit of internal code, regular function code in there. So if you're doing a CTF and you can rule that out, you just sped yourself up extremely fast. And places like DEF CON and all, of course, they're doing this. One last script I'll show you real quickly and then take questions. This is Sophos antivirus. I've shown this a couple of times. Is Tim Medine here? Is he still in here? Yeah, here he goes. Tim actually helped me out a little bit with this one. It's a banned functions check. It looks for the SDL violations. And you can see in here that this particular instance of Sophos antivirus uses strcpy and strcat. And if we scroll up, we can actually go to those locations in the code, and it sets software breakpoints on them so you can debug and find out where potential 0 days are. So my point of all this is to show you that by getting into reversing and using IDA and a little bit of exploit dev, you can greatly speed up your time and remove the intimidation. Because a lot of people will say, I don't have time to do this stuff during a pen test. And my question is why? If you're good at it and you've got to spend your personal time, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., nobody bothers you. And you use that time, and you get better at it, and then you can start applying it to pen tests, and then you get that job that maybe you've always wanted to. So hopefully it helped you remove any little fear or something, or helped you out with potentially getting into reversing. Happy to take questions, but thank you very much for listening. Yay.
Any questions? Questions?
Yep.
There we go.
Question is, if you have 0 experience in reversing, where do you start? SANS 660, right? There's a lot of great tutorials out there. If you go to corlan.be, Corlan Coder, so CORELAN.be, they have a lot of great introductory exploit development and reversing type tutorials. OpenRCE has some good stuff. I mean, really, just grabbing a demo copy of IDA for free and loading Hello World into it, and then just start looking at the disassembly and Googling. Stuff like that really helps. Any other questions?
No other questions? All right. Thank you. Oh, we got one here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a bit new to this, and I'm just trying to figure out, how do you know which library function to use when you're trying to disassemble a code?
How do we know which library function to use? So you're talking about like the Flirt Flare example I just did? Yeah, so what you could do is go in and see if I have Kali Linux up right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I changed it to root instead of Tor. So if I say strings ping, at the top here, you can start, if you go through the strings, you can see what libraries and stuff are used, and you can learn some of that information. At least that's one way. And there's like a lot of tools like PE Studio and different ones that show you kind of information about the compilation of that, or other decompilers and disassemblers can help you.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
So when you're starting some exploit dev, do you, like on your main box, you do all your disassembly? Is it an up-to-date Windows 10 version of this, or have you ever taken a executable or software that you're debugging, move it to an old version of Windows, possibly without restrictions, and debug it there? Or so I guess it's kind of like, do you start your exploit dev to find an exploit in the program itself without having to deal with ASLR or EMET or things like that?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a good question, but big question. There's obviously you want to, if it's whatever's the easiest possible that's going to work. Like a good example would be patch diffing. When I do patch diffing, if patches are still available on embedded XP, I'll go get those because reversing patches on XP that same bug affects Windows 10 is going to be a lot easier than going in on Windows 10. So whatever you can do to get the bug working on the easiest operating system possible at first is usually very. I like to start there if we can, and then yeah, you start adding things in like Emmet to see which Emmet controls are going to stop your exploit, or you might have to get like a memory leak to work with your type confusion bug to be able to, because all the libraries are randomized, so you've got to find a memory leak to be able to rebase, and yeah, so it's a big question. We should talk offline about that. I heard there's beers later maybe. So.
We can neither confirm nor deny that.
Last one, yep.
How do you still have a Windows XP ISO?
Oh man, the dark web and Tor and all that. I've got Windows 95 and Windows 3.1. All right, that's a good question to finish up with. But thank you again. Thank you, Ed, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Steve. Yes. Round of applause. Thank you, Steve.